Mist climbs the Smoky Mountains in the distance. The birds chirp, the crickets chatter. The stars shine brighter here, the moon pasty and clean. The geography is difficult to describe, but the people are not. Simplistically honest, painstakingly diligent, sometimes deprived, but never dependent. These are the people of Coker Creek, Tennessee. Sitting on the edge of Monroe County in East Tennessee, Coker Creek is a quaint, rustic mountain village where change doesn't come quickly. Since being settled by Scotch-Irish pioneers in the late 1600s, Coker Creek's rich and varied history is kept alive today by the descendants of those settlers. Many citizens of Coker Creek enjoy their seclusion. It is the last thread they have connecting them with those who have gone on before. This mindset, coupled with the geographic limitations and low socioeconomic status of the region, propels the area into relative isolation. The residents of Coker Creek are denied amenities that most of the country takes for granted. Easily accessed technologies like cell phones and DSL are not available in Coker Creek, and technological advancements, including the telephone, are far behind the rest of the nation. It was a long road from the introduction of telephones to its installation in virtually every home. The United States patent for the telephone was granted in 1876 to Alexander Graham Bell. Major cities were quick to install telephone lines. The Federal Communications Commission report stated that in 1926 there were 15 million telephones installed in the United States. Yet it would be several decades before the hills of Coker Creek would be introduced to this innovation.
Honey, we didn't know what a telephone was till me and Ken would take turns, staying with Aunt Ella when Oscar was on the mountain.
Hollywood's portrayal of the knowledge of telephones in mountain communities is very similar to tales told in Coker Creek.
And I've got to call my office in Tulsa. Hey, you got a telephone?
A what?
A telephone? Well, maybe one of your neighbors has one. It's well, down in this country, it's probably a box attached to the wall. And you talk into it, and they can hear you in Tulsa.
Maybe you better sit down for a spell.
In 1925, Coker Creek resident Oscar Radford was hired by the United States Forest Service to put up the initial telephone lines from nearby Tellico Plains to Wachee Mountain Fire Tower. Radford served as the fire warden at Wachee and used the telephone to report wildfires to the ranger station. He finished hanging these lines to trees on the side of the dirt roads, and the first telephone in Coker Creek was installed in his home in 1926. This phone had limited capabilities and could only call two places: the Wachee Fire Tower and the Tellico Ranger Station. The year the first phone was installed on the mountain, the rest of the United States was dancing the Charleston during an economic boom. Charles Lindbergh was flying high in the spirit of St. Louis, and Henry Ford was mass-producing cars, but some of Coker Creek's citizens had no idea what an automobile was.
A rattly old truck. And us kids that was outside playing made a dive for the house. Crawled under beds.
The stock market crash of 1929 left the United States reeling. President Roosevelt's answer to the failing economy was the New Deal, a series of programs designed to provide relief to the unemployed, reform of business and financial practices, and recovery of the economy. One aspect of this program was the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. The CCC had two main purposes: to provide employment and vocational training to the unemployed young men of the nation, and conservation of America's natural resources. There were about 70,000 CCC workers in Tennessee, and Coker Creek played host to several hundred at Camp Rolling Stone, a CCC camp in service from 1933 to 1942. Oscar Radford, though still a Forest Service fire warden, was contracted to install additional governmental telephone lines in Coker Creek, but was paid with CCC funds. These telephones were property of the Forest Service, and in addition to connecting these men to the ranger station, the phones could be connected to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. This was especially important for soldiers from Coker Creek fighting in World War II, as evidenced by the story of Coker Creek resident William George Shaw. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in September 1941, carrying this writing booklet that contained contact information for his family in the event of his injury or demise. As a resident of Coker Creek, his only way to contact his family via telephone was to call the Monroe County Jail. The jail could then route his call to one of the Forest Service phones in Coker Creek. Coker Creek coped without telephones. Its citizens did not have extensive contact with the outside world, but they led active social lives within. They passed useful information around, even without the help of a communication device.
You didn't have telephones. You just spread word by mouth, and one person would take it to the next.
The Federal Communications Commission reported 670,000 residential telephones were in use in 1956 in Tennessee, and that year Coker Creek's residents were just making their first call. The post-war boom of the 50s brought the gift of Teleco Telephone Company to Coker Creek.
I bought the company in November of 1954 with the understanding that I would assume operation January the 1st, 1955.
Certainly the telephone must have changed Coker Creek's citizens' day-to-day activities. Mamie Murphy moved to Coker Creek in 1934 and has lived there ever since. She owned a general store in the community and served 54 years as the United States postmistress. When the telephone came, it impacted her business.
And after got telephone, they could telephone their orders in. See, it saved everybody.
The telephone greatly improved life in Coker Creek. A fine example of this is a phone chain prayer line run by Long Ridge Baptist Church. It is used to pass on prayer requests, praise reports, and general church information. More than 50 families currently participate in the prayer line.
Now, we had our list. I'd go to the next one. If I couldn't get the next one, I'd just go on down, I'd get one, and then I would call. We had 2 lines. I'd get a hold of the next person on the second line, and that was their problem.
Another example is the use of a telephone fire alert system by Coker Creek Volunteer Fire Department.
We used a phone system that rang 10 different phones, and each individual had a call list to call so they could alert more firefighters. We used that to utilize a quickness in response.
An illustration of how this is beneficial is a story about a branch of the Shaw family in Coker Creek.
It was the summer of 1974, and we walked over to my grandmother's house to visit with her for a while. The lady from our church drove over and said that our house was on fire. My mom and my brother walked back over to our house, and the lady went down the road to call someone else because Mama didn't have a telephone. By the time the fire department came, our house was a total loss.
If this system had been an option, their home might have been salvaged. Today, the Volunteer Fire Department continues the use of the telephone fire alert system. The residents of Coker Creek have been positively changed in many ways by the telephone, but there is one negative change that worries the whole community. Their long-held tradition of face-to-face interactions, known as visiting, have dramatically declined.
People don't visit like they used to.
I think they visit less, a lot less. They used to go visit more and visit the sick, and now then we just use the telephone.
They quit visiting as much. They can get on the telephone and talk for 5 minutes and not have to drive down the road for a mile or 5 miles or walk as it was in the early days. The telephone gave you more time at home. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know.
But that seems to be the only drawback to having telephones in the community. The impact of Coker Creek's telephones is very well defined in a history-making occurrence in October 1972.
Coker Creek, now one thing for you is Coker Creek was the first rural community in the nation to receive a whole one-party telephone service. No party lines. I was real proud of that. We made national news on that.
The most important thing to Coker Creek regarding telephones is the landline. To this day, there is no cell phone service in Coker Creek, and Coker Creek needs landlines to be able to communicate more fully with the outside world. So what's next for Coker Creek?
But, the next step is cellular, and we've been pushing U.S. Cellular to go ahead and put a tower out there, but they say there's just not enough to pay for those.
However, change comes slow to the mountain, with or without telephones. Although the telephone assisted Coker Creek greatly, it did not change its people. Coker Creek is full of hard-working, honest people, and that is what defines this community.